happening is our lungs are supposed to be very flexible and pliable. But the longer you worked on this machine and the more of this dirt and dust that you ingested in, the harder, literally, the harder your lungs became and would not be able to expand and contract properly, making breathing very, very difficult to the point where you probably couldn't even work any longer. And a lot of these guys later on in life died because of silicosis. Now, when Frank Liner found this out, he was the inventor. I'll put a water line in, that'll reduce the dust, that's good. And it did. But now what happens is the water combines with all the dust and dirt, all right, creates kind of a mud slurry. And where does it end up? Right here where I'm standing.
Pneumonia.
Okay? Now, in those days, you know, you had your little rubber boots on. You didn't have nice insulated boots like we have today. It's 43 or 44 degrees in here year round. It never changes. You can come in July when it's 100 degrees outside and come here. This is the temperature. You can come in January when it's 30 below zero. This is the temperature. It doesn't change. And the reason for that is there's lots of water in this hill. And guess what the temperature of the water is? About 44 degrees. So you're standing in this ice cold water up to your ankles. Okay, you're working hard, you're probably sweating. There's a good chance, certainly you're going to catch a cold. Worst case scenario was pneumonia. And if you caught pneumonia, that's almost like the kiss of death back then. Because they didn't have all the antibiotics and the doctors didn't have the wherewithal that people have today to treat people with that particular problem. So this is a great machine as far as what it physically could do. But the guys that operated really paid a very, very steep price. Now, on the way in, you might have seen some of these hanging up. This would be for the blaster to keep his fuses in here to keep them dry. The second thing that he worried about all the time was the dynamite. Now, dynamite back then, a lot of it was homemade by the miners themselves. They didn't make a lot of money, so if they could make a couple extra bucks, they'd sell it back to the company. It was nitrogen and glycerin. And if you read about it, I'm not an expert in dynamite by any stretch of the imagination. If you read about it, you can't get wet, can't get damp, can't get cold. If it doesn't work very well. Well, to ensure a perfect blast, what they would do the night before, they'd make a charcoal fire here. You're going to need 52 sticks of dynamite. So you're going to take 5 of those canisters, you're going to put them right around in a circle around that fire. Now, they're not going to explode, okay, because you don't have a cap on them and you don't have a fuse or anything of that sort. If they would, by chance, overheat and start on fire, you'd have a nice big sparkler for the 4th of July. That's basically what you would have. So in the morning when you come here, the dynamite's nice and warm, he's all ready to go. Now, these are random holes. There's a pattern that these guys would want. The pattern went like this. You'd have 1 hole in the middle, and on the same plane, 2 more out here. 2 holes in the middle, 2 holes on that side, 2 holes way over there, and 4 on the bottom. So you pack them all with dynamite, put a cap on them, and put a fuse on. All the fuses are different lengths. When he lights that last fuse, he takes off running. Okay? And he's going to get down there and he's going to kneel down and he said, I hope I hear 13 explosions. You're not going to have one great big explosion. By having 13 explosions, you're going to get more off that wall. So, which ones go first, second, third, and so forth? The first 2 to explode are 2 in the middle. That makes a big hole right here. The next 4 that go off are the 2 over here and the 2 over here. They push everything in. The next 3 that go off are the ones across the top. They push everything down. Now you've got all this rock and all this debris down here. And you got 4 more holes. They go off, they throw everything right out here where we're standing. Now after 4 or 5 hours, you can start extracting all the rock that came off of that wall over there. How were these tunnels emptied? You had a stable outside with donkeys and small carts. You'd bring them in, fill up the carts, escort them out until, let's say, this area was cleaned out. Let's just say for our purposes, this is the end of the tunnel right here where these guys are standing. It's all rock. Okay, what's your next step? 13 more holes. You know, it repeated itself over and over and over again, and that's why it took such a long time to get from point A to point B. These guys were tough people. They were good workers. You know, they were not lazy at all. And it was extremely stressful working under these particular conditions.
What was the hourly wage?
Pardon me?
What was the
I will
hourly
tell
wage?
you a little bit later.
Are they following an ore body?
No, what they're doing is they're exploring. Everything is, they're exploring. They don't know where the good ore is. That's why as they're progressing down here, they're analyzing this stuff, but it's all 20-25%. Back then, it had to be 50-50 if they're gonna make any money. The first 5 companies that get involved in this exploratory mine all go bankrupt. It's not until they get down to the big. All right, this is Small Stope. After 4 years of really hard work where 5 companies went bankrupt, the Penn company just got lucky. And this is where they found a really good, specular hematite that they could start making some money with. The problem that they ran into was right there behind you, the water. If you look at that wall over there, especially right next to the water, you see a discoloration down there. Tells you one thing, that the water once upon a time was a lot higher than it is right now. And what happened in here is you were starting to get floods. Every time we had a flood in here, you had to bring in pumps. When you brought in pumps, the miners had to leave. The miners left, the company wasn't making any money. So after 1 year, they did take out about 4 million tons of ore out of this area. But they had periodic floods. And the company finally decided at this point to pull the plug. We're leaving. We're not going to put up with this anymore. We're wasting too much time. About 4 months after they leave here, they're able to get into the big Stope, where we'll be in about 5 minutes or so. And this is where they really make a heck of a lot of money. Okay? So they did well in here. Like I said, getting 4 million tons of ore was good. But that problem always kept on rearing its head. And they decided that they would get out. Now, how did these people work during this period of time? They worked by candlelight. At the beginning of every single day, you were responsible for purchasing from the company. That's how cheap these guys were. You had to buy your own candles from them. So when you came in here, all right, let's just say there was a whole bunch of ore here. You'd have some candle holders over there, a couple more over here. You'd bring in your animal, fill up the cart, escort them out. Now, as you were doing that, in this little recess over here, you might have some guys preparing for another blast. How'd you like to be the guy by candlelight holding that drill bit in your hands with your partner with a 20-pound sledgehammer? Okay? Now, you better be a good shot. You better trust them. But I'm sure that there's going to be a mishit every once in a while. And a mishit meant you're going to have a crooked finger. That's why I always say there must have been a lot of crooked fingered miners during this period of time. So lots of guys could have hurt fingers, hands, wrists, etc. Not because the guy planned on it, but things do in fact happen under these circumstances. Now the other problem that you have with candles is this, okay? This is not the only place where work was being done. This is not the only place where dynamite was being done, okay, exploding. Anytime you have a dynamite explosion in here, it takes the oxygen out of the air. And if you don't have oxygen for a second or two, your candle goes out. And even with a cell phone, it gets pretty dark in here. Now it's nice and dark. So you better have somebody, all right, quite quickly relighting your candle so you could get back to work. The last thing I always say here is, it is truly remarkable what the men of the Upper Peninsula did in mines throughout the whole UP using the very, very simple tools that they had. It's unbelievable. It would not happen today. I know what most people would tell these guys if they were forced to work like these guys would. They wouldn't work. You'd have to be John Smith. If you don't work, you don't eat. That's about it. But these guys came to work every day, and it was miraculous what they were able to accomplish. All right, let's head out to the main tunnel, turn to the right, and stop by where it says Stoper Drill. I'll bring up the rear. Up there in the distance, you can see a faint light. Now, on a real good sunny day, it'll be a lot brighter than that. That comes from an air shaft, okay, that was put in by the miners when they came in here to mine around 1874, 1875. It goes up 400 feet to the surface. Now, how was it put in? It was put in using the Stoper drill. So that gives you some idea about how proficient that machine was to go 400 feet straight up. So if you're wondering how far underneath the ground we are right now, give or take a few feet, we're about 400 feet underneath the ground. Now, there's Big John, getting humid down here. There are days in July where I cannot even see him. It's so humid down here. Now, that's Big John. He's 10 feet tall, not 40, like the one out in the parking lot. We're approximately 600 feet away from him. Now, I know it doesn't appear to be that far away, but when I turn on the lights, you'll understand why it's called the Big Stope. Now, here's the story behind this. In 1874, when the miners came in here, it did not look like this at all. This great big pile of rock that you see in front of you right there was all attached to the ceiling. That rock goes down about 100 feet farther down than what you can see. So all that was picked up and put against the ceiling. What was there, that's where the good iron ore was. And for 3 years, they mined in here. And what it looked like in 1877, when they were coming kind of to an end of mining this little area out, you had a great big hole in the ground in front of us that went down 100 feet farther than what you could see. So all this whole area here was cleared right out. Now the mining engineers realized that this big ore body, and if you take a look at this picture up here, did not go straight back towards Big John. It veered off in that direction. And they understood that they'd not be able to put a tunnel in and really do justice to taking out all the good iron ore that happened to be there. That's why they went into this shaft mine that is located up about, like I said, about a quarter mile up from where we were standing when we left the building. All that on the south side of what is US 2 right now is farmers' fields. They found a spot up there that had lots of slate, which was a perfect place to put in a shaft. So they got rid of the topsoil. They started drilling down into the ground and dynamiting, okay? Once they got down about 100 feet, you put a great big receiving unit up here. You'd have a building over here with winches and counterbalances so that you could put things into the shaft and then draw things out of the shaft. Now this mine right here went from 1877 to 1945. So they mined here for 68 years, okay? So during that 68-year period of time, they end up putting in 1,327 feet. And during that 68-year period of time, out of this great big ore body that existed, they took over 22.6 million tons of ore out of there. Now, these tunnels up here, the first 2 or 3 were probably put in before 1900. The last 1 or 2 were probably put in 1930, 1935. Okay? Now, let's make a little story. It's 1925. You're a miner, you got to get down to the 5th level to do your work. How do you get down there? All right, the shaft, this part, is probably from where my left hand is over here, probably all the way out to this pole right here. And it's from where I'm standing out to where that ladder is right there. So this is a pretty big hole that's going to go straight down into the ground. On one side, they had what's called a bird cage, and that's all it was, is a steel cage. You could put 12 to 16 guys in the cage. These people would be notified, 5th level. They'd know exactly how many feet to drop you down. You'd get down here, walk the tunnel in, do your mining, come back at the end of your shift, jump back into the cage, bring it to the surface, and you'd go home. Now, how did they get ore out of here? Now, using some of the machinery that I showed you outside, they'd get that ore as close to the shaft as they possibly could. On the opposite side of the shaft, you'd have these great big steel buckets. Now, when we get outside at the end of the tour, just look right behind the train. There's a bucket that's about this high and about this round. And you fill that thing up with iron ore, bring it to the surface, and stockpile it. Now, in 1877, they had a railroad line put in. Because now, what are you going to do with all this good iron ore? You got to bring it somewhere so you can make money. Well, the closest place they had around here to bring it was Escanaba, which is 40 miles east of here. It's on Lake Michigan. It's what they call a deep water port. That allows all these great big ore ships to come in there. They don't have to worry about bottoming out. So all the ore that came out of this mine, that's where it ended up. So you fill up these boats with iron ore, send them down to places like Gary, Indiana, where you got the big smelters. They smelt this stuff down into steel. Now you say, why is that so important? Without steel, no industrial revolution. You can't have great big bridges like the Big Mac. You can't have skyscrapers. All the rails that crisscross our country. All the chassis of trucks and automobiles. Everything's made out of steel. Our whole lives are surrounded by those particular products. Then, and even more so now. Okay? So, during that period of time, again, these mines are going great guns. 1940, 1941 rolls around, you got 400 guys that are working here. That's World War II. All right, 400 guys work here, 3 shifts, 8 hours each, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They just pumped out as much ore as they possibly could. Why? Because the demand for steel was so high. August 1945 comes along, thank goodness the war ends. But with the war ending, the demand for steel and the demand for iron ore is cut in half. And instead of making X amount of dollars, okay, you're making half as much as you were. These companies couldn't make the money that they wanted to make. You had a lot of veterans coming back, you had unionization going on, they wanted better salaries, they wanted better fringe benefits, they wanted better safety precautions taken. These companies couldn't do it. So between 1945 and 1955, a lot of these companies just said, that's it, we're closing down, which they did. Now, how do you close down a mine? Not that hard. Number one, you'd have to go through all these tunnels, take out the equipment that you want to take out. Certainly, some of the equipment was going to be left behind. They're not going to take everything out. The stuff that was more expensive would be taken out. Now, once you get everything out, the last thing that you're going to do is you're going to shut the pumps off. The farther you go down to the ground, the more water you're going to deal with. Reading about this mine, they had pumps in here, water pumps that went 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They never shut them off because there's that much water that would be infiltrating the shaft and some of these tunnels. Now, what happens when you shut the pumps off back then for good, it took 2 years for all these tunnels and the shaft and this great big ore body that exists, like I said, half of it's under US 2 and into the south of US 2, it's painted blue because about 300 feet underneath the ground, you've got a lake that's 1,200 feet deep. Okay? And that's what happened with what happened with these mines. Once the pumps were shut off, they filled up with water, then what do? You have your receiving unit over here, you take that out, you take this building out, you put a big cement slab over the top, put some wire around there, fence it in, nobody can get in. And that's what happened to all the mines in the Upper Peninsula. In fact, where I'm from is a little kind of a community in Ironwood itself. It's called Jessaville. Okay? Within walking distance of my house, 4 or 5 blocks in some cases, there were these shafts. And that's what they did. They just put a big cement slab over, they put a big wire around there, and they put a little plaque out there. This is such and such mine, operated from such and such, such and such. I remember one there was about a quarter mile away from my house, was the Paps mine. They had a big cave-in up there. And they worked for almost a week to get the men out of there. But every guy that was trapped down in the mine, they got out. A lot of men didn't get out. There were lots and lots of men that died in these particular mines. Now, finally, how did this beautiful dome come about? Like I said, in 1877, when we left here, it was right above our heads and went right across and intersected above Big John's head. Well, what happened? Well, when they put in the shaft, all these tunnels, and took out all this ore, it's about a quarter mile or so, maybe even less than that, in that direction. Lots of dynamite was used. Over that 68-year period of time, they probably had tens of thousands of dynamite explosions. The majority of rock that you see in front of you that was all up on the ceiling is sandstone. Now, in 1877, everybody left here, so nobody knows exactly when the first great big piece fell from the ceiling and started filling up this gigantic hole that had been left by the miners. Piece by piece by piece by piece over the year, it fell down, filled this great big hole up as you see it right now, and left us this beautiful dome. That's what the top of this hill looks like, right there. So it's 600 feet across, 300 feet from left to right. It's 180 feet up to the top of the dome. And then if you go another 400 feet above that, then you're going to hit the surface. And that's the story about why the Big Stope looks like the Big Stope. All right, let's head back to the train. Somebody